engineering to figure out how the 2000 South alignment was going to come off of Geneva Road and tie into the parkway. If you can kind of see off to the area where it says Exhibit A on the left, that's kind of where it would tie into the parkway. The development we have on the north side, though, right next to Geneva Road, it's very little of the roadway itself is going to be on that alignment. And to be able to get a connection, I'm guessing that a lot of people in Provo were concerned about how do we make a connection to Geneva Road on 2000 South. Well, the bottom line is we're picking up right-of-way for the road from the developer that's happening there. We have two property owners. We're picking up the right-of-way from one developer, but the other property that's kind of to the west end is skip done, and somebody's going to have to buy some right-of-way from him. And then a lot of the right-of-way also from the road is going to have to be taken from the folks, I think, that kind of have a horse barn and whatever at that location. Now, the good thing, just in contact with UDOT, they say that the intersection of Geneva Road and our 2000 South, your 2000 North meets signal warrants. They're working on putting together a project to build a traffic signal there. And they would like to meet with our engineering staff and whoever else wants to meet with them within the next couple of weeks to see, okay, are we going to have a road west of there when by the time the school opens, because they need to know that for their signal design. And of course, they're willing to fund the signal itself and construct that, but they want to coordinate with us on the timing of that road. Is the road, do you plan on having the road built and connected to the signal at the time the high school opens, or is it going to come sometime in the future? And there's just a layout of that development. Again, you can kind of see from that the layout of that development that we are going to get dedication of some of that road here in the near future from that developer. But the blank parcel is the vacant parcel that we're going to have to pay for some right-of-way right there. Any questions, comments?
How is the high school coming along and the roads around the high school?
Sure. I'm not sure I can speak to the high school itself, but it's making really good progress. They're on schedule. Right now,
And the schedule is parkway itself.
She just retweeted it. So I think she had,
I want to make sure that what we do is consistent with, obviously, the interests of Orem, but also Provo, and how we might work together to obviously eat this elephant one bite at a time, because it's going to cost tens of millions of dollars to build this facility. And so are there things we can do collectively, cooperatively, work together, try and garner the support and the funds necessary to finish this road?
well, the problem
There's
is,
kind of question
we need
about.
to find the wireless mic, because we don't have any mics out there.
As far as
In the system, we have to be at a mic.
Part of the problem we've had in Provo is we've always thought it was down the road. And we put in a few things that made it even more difficult because it was down the road. Is your footprint basically
You guys didn't have
determined
planning
what
commission
it's gonna
yesterday,
be,
did you?
or is it pretty volatile?
Yes, we know what the footprint is, that, if you look on what's on the screen now, you can kind of see to the top left part of the screen, we've had the developer set aside a 110-foot wide corridor, and then in addition to that, we've got another 6 feet for an easement for a sidewalk. So we've got the width there. One of the things I think that maybe we need to,
Let me show you another, let me go back to a previous slide if I can. One of the things maybe we need to have a discussion about again is whether or not this stays a corridor that the cities own and maintain, or if this is something that becomes a UDOT facility in the future. Because they have deeper pockets, they have more funds, and is this something that, again, south of this orange line on Geneva Road, it's just going to be a 3-lane road in Orem. And is this a facility maybe that becomes sort of a belt route that UDOT adopts, and maybe the construction of the roadway actually happens sooner rather than relying on MAG funds and getting a few $1 million at a time and seeing it build at a very slow pace?
So, UDOT took it over, and they give up Geneva as the main road.
possibly, it could be a trade. Maybe we pick up Geneva Road and they pick up the market.
Because in Provo, we have some issues where they haven't been able to resolve widening and fixing it to what it really ought to be.
Yeah, years ago, we went through a environmental analysis with them, and because of the number of historic homes that were in the area in Provo, they didn't want to touch it. I think they're open to a discussion about a possible trade, but, there are benefits and drawbacks about that. For instance, they decide what the access management and control is going to be, what the driveway is going to be. But that's something that, we could work it out with the corridor agreement
And figure out, I guess my voice isn't loud enough. We could work out some kind of an access agreement with them on, where are the accesses going to be? Where are the traffic signals going to be? And come up with a master plan if that's something that we want to consider with UDOT.
What are your thoughts as a city on Geneva Road as far as how it is now and as far as the future?
So HDMI number 2.
I mean, are you interested in seeing it widen quite a bit? Are you looking at development along the side of it?
Video. Oh, that's audio. That's weird. Sorry. Okay. I thought that looked different. Paul, we need to have people speaking to the mic.
I think in many respects, we have kind of a tale of two roads. In Orem, we could potentially have up to a 7-lane section, and then as we draw closer to Provo and to the south, the road necks considerably, and given some of these limitations with historic homes and things like that, I don't think the anticipated width of the road would remain a 7-lane road as you draw closer to Provo, even in Orem.
Yeah, again, what we're planning for on Geneva Road is what the center typical section is. You have the center turn lane, you have just one lane in each direction, one northbound lane, one southbound lane, and then some shoulders on the road. And again, that's something that's in our transportation master plan right now, but, you know, that's what we plan on having going down to the 2000 South, our 2000 South coordinate, south of the Parkway alignment. I guess we're trying to take some minutes, so if anybody else wants to, maybe we could pass the microphone around so that as we follow up with some minutes of the meeting.
Yeah, Dave Connect. So what you're doing south on Geneva there is appropriate, would seem appropriate for what could happen in Provo long term. But really that works best if the new frontage road is taken over by UDOT. Yeah, the Parkway.
I'm speaking probably more as a commuter than as a council member. Yeah, Dave Harding. So I'd be interested to see what the traffic demand models are showing, but I'd love to just see shoulders on the sections of Geneva through Provo. But I also think, yes, if the Parkway comes in, as we're showing, that it may keep the traffic demand to the point where I think much of our section of Geneva Road would match that middle cross section that you show there. I think a lot of the development that's on the north part, I'm not sure that there's not much, I'm not sure there's a lot of demand left in Provo to put on that. A lot of it is more, I think, east-west. But again, I think that I'd defer to the professionals with their traffic models.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to our next topic then. And this is a discussion on student parking requirements. This is always a hot topic for those cities that have a major university. And I know we are facing more and more challenges in the city than we have in the past. More comments from the neighbors, more requirements from the non-university students that we have. As many of you know, our university is not capped, and we open enrollment, and it is set to grow at least 1,000 students per year in a few years. So that's a really big issue. So we want to have a discussion on that. Paul, would you like to?
Yeah, let me start out, Mayor. We have two student housing projects that are kind of on the horizon right now. One of them is pretty imminent. Wants to build right next to the campus. They're proposing a parking ratio of a 0.65 parking stalls per bed. And of course, we're recognizing, or we've heard that you have gone to a higher standard for your student housing parking, and that you've gone from a 0.7 to a 0.8, plus additional stalls in addition to that for visitor parking. And so our concern is we want to make sure that we get the right parking. We've had some problem with our high density housing parking in the past. For instance, some council members may have heard about it's not a student housing project, but it's the Monteval on 920 North State. And I think we've resolved a lot of those problems, because what they were doing is they were paying an extra rent. They were requiring an extra payment in addition to rent to be able to park on site. And so what the people were doing, of course, is, they were parking on street, and they were finding adjoining parking lots to park in just to save those extra costs. But anyway, getting back to the student housing, we don't want to make the mistake of going to a 0.65 if Provo has documented that you've had a problem at 0.7 and you've decided to go to a 0.8. One of the things, too, we're thinking about is, if we understand correctly, at BYU, our understanding is that for the first year, the students quite often end up in a dorm and they don't have cars, and they go through this training process of the first year of not having a car. And so, if they decide to move out of a dorm and go to somewhere where there is parking, are they already trained? Another problem we're having, we just received a parking study for some locations in Provo that the consultant is saying that a .65 is probably the sweet spot and maybe even be a little bit too high. So anyway, we just want to make sure that we gather enough information about, why did you have a problem at .7 and decide to go to a .8?
So you're asking you're debating .65, and the reason I say that is, we get the map up, I'll show you a project that's kind of a catalyst for us re-examining this. Joaquin Village was built 4 years ago. Joaquin Village was built 4 years ago, and Bill Pepperoni. And immediately upon its occupancy, we started receiving complaints from the surrounding neighbors. And just doing a drive-by any time of the day showed that, yeah, there was definitely a spillover parking problem. Joaquin Village was approved at, I believe, .64. It was part of a pro zone and went through a negotiation process with the city. That's, where was the location? You can't see this laser on that screen, it looks like. Between Fifth North and 6th North. And what east would you say, Kim? So it's that largest building kind of in the middle of the picture there. So I went by and I surveyed Joaquin Village the semester it opened, and I just looked at the number of on-site spaces they had, and I looked at which they represented were fully leased, and I looked at the waiting list of their tenants to get parking spaces. 3 years later, I did the exact same survey. In that time, I also surveyed the Isles, which is a new development on 7th North and 3rd East. And I've surveyed a new project that's on 9th East and 7th North. So we're looking at those projects and the amount of parking they have on site and the amount of people they have on their waiting list for cars. The .8 would handle that waiting list. But that waiting list would would be completely absorbed by their students already parking and those waiting to get spaces. So the .8 per bed would absorb that waiting list. The .2 per unit for visitor parking would then provide a reasonable standard for that. What we don't know, and what the traffic engineers deal with all the time, is that when you widen Geneva Road and add lanes, a lot of times you induce traffic, right? More people drive on it because you widened it. The same thing can happen with parking. When you add more parking, you may just encourage more people to live there who have cars. We may actually induce a higher demand. We don't know that yet. That .8 was calculated, like I said, over 3 surveys for 3 years. And actually interviewing students who live in the projects, I was surprised to find out that in the Isles, which is 7th North and 3rd East, the residents who live there said, oh, you can find a parking space anytime. But if you come after 11 o'clock at night, you may have to park 3 blocks away on the street to find a parking space. Well, to be impacting residents 3 blocks away, I was surprised that the spillover was that extreme, okay? So we've just enacted that higher standard. We don't have any student housing projects on the drawing board right now, so we'll have to just wait and see when the next one comes in to see how it works. It's only allowed in this area of south of BYU campus where we assume it's a walkable area. That's the reason why we're allowing that ratio in the first place, is because we believe it's a walkable area to campus. What we find out is that most of the students do mostly walk, but most of them still want a car to drive when they need a car, and that's what causes the rub. Like you, your university is largely a commuter campus, and that creates all kinds of externalities for you. This is a commuter area for Provo. A lot of commuters, students, will park in this area and then walk up to campus, and that skews all of the discussion also. So I was going to say that's a good point that Bill brought up, Gary again, is we have 2 distinct problems going on in Joaquin, just south of BYU. One of the first things to remember is in the last census, if you look at the area
density population that you find in Manhattan. So we're talking very dense, a lot of people there per acre living in this area. So we have a lot of people living, but because of BYU and some of the things BYU is doing, we also have a lot of people drive into that neighborhood, park on the streets, and then walk up to campus because it's easier to do that for them there and then say park out by the Marriott Center and walk down to the Kimball Tower, the life science buildings, some of those issues. So one of the things that we're trying to do is figure out what the exact parking ratio we need to have. And that begs the question of, do we want to provide parking for anybody and everybody who would ever want to bring a vehicle to Provo? Or do we want to have some policies in place that would discourage students from bringing vehicles into the community? And then the second corollary problem is that commuter parking that comes in. And those are two distinct problems, and dealing with those are two very distinct solutions. And that's a really hard thing for us to get our arms around. Because you can go, even at the busiest times, we've done this a handful of times over the years, we go out around 3 in the morning on a Monday morning, we dress all in black and scour the neighborhood there. But we go into every project. We've gone into every parking garage, every street, and counted cars every time. And we still find, though there are lots of cars on the street, most parking garages still have 15 to 20% of the parking spaces not used. But yet the street parking will be packed. So
I've noticed around King Henry.
Yeah.
You're lucky if you have 6 inches between cars on the street, and they're all stacked together in there. So how do you regulate that? You do parking permits at all within the community? I understood that around BYU Heritage Halls where they don't have parking, that they give parking into one of the lots further away, or else parking permits.
we have some parking permit areas over by the King Henry apartments that you're talking about. In the Joaquin neighborhood, we don't regulate the street at all. And that's one of the issues. We do have people or apartment complexes that have parking available. But people are parking out on the street because it's easier and quicker for them to use it. But we don't regulate that. We also have, as you know, this area is very old, and we have apartment complexes there with multiple units that were built, in some in the 40s, in 50s, where parking ratios weren't at 1 for 1 or 0.7 for 1. They're at 0.25. Some are at 0 parking, but yet it's a unit that has, or a complex that has 5-6 units and 4 or 5 students in each apartment, and they have 0 off-street parking, but they're non-conforming because they complied with code back in the 40s and 50s when they came in. So one of the things that we're trying to do with this is trying to find out what the proper parking ratio is for new developments today, but even if we hit that just perfectly, it still wouldn't take care of the issues that are on the street today, because we have so many older apartment complexes with very small parking ratios. And so we're going to have to really have a hard conversation about managing managing Provo City streets and who can park. And UVU students. We have a high degree of UVU students living in Joaquin also.
But I'm sorry, not just living, but those coming on to class, and they're just parking wherever.
Yeah, we have a lot of that.
It's a special problem.
Let me speak as a non-expert but an elected official since 1994. The lower the parking ratios, the more the developers will love you, the more the neighbors will hate you. So if you go lower than .80, you're going to be sorry.
you go lower than 0.8%?
Yes.
You spoke to the kind of the dichotomy, you have the resident issues and you have the commuter issues. Have you had this conversation with BYU? Are they in any way sympathetic? Are they willing to, for example, allow overnight parking in some of their lots as a?
They're eternally sympathetic.
But they're not necessarily wanting to engage in a meaningful solution process. And maybe I should. Let me jump in on that. I think that,
John Curtis. I don't know how to answer that because you can point to things like the ride that they have put in, and they're starting to charge for parking on campus is actually a good thing for us. So I would say in the last couple of years, they've taken a couple of moves that have been very optimistic and helpful. That doesn't mean there aren't other issues that we would love them to jump on and address. But I say that cautiously because of the many good things they have done and the partnership that we have with them there. The ride, for instance, is pulling, I don't know the exact proximity that thing circles, but 2 miles out. It's bringing all of them in, which is, we're trying to get to a point where we can actually look these students in the eye and say, you don't need a car. And this is a huge piece of being able to do that, as is BRT.
it wasn't my intent. I apologize if I'm trying to hit one against.
No, I didn't perceive that at all. And
The other question I have is, are you seeing similar types of challenges in and around your transit center and some of the other COD type projects that you have underway? Is this indicative of just one particular neighborhood, or are you seeing this as a challenge in other parts?
We're seeing it as a challenge in other parts of the community, especially around the TOD. In a second, I'll pass this back to Bill, and he'll get into a little more detail on Startup Crossing, which is right across the tracks from our intermodal center, which is on Freedom Boulevard, in between Freedom Boulevard and University Avenue. So 200 East in Provo and 600 South is where it's located. And or 200 West. And so what in that area, what we're trying to do is figure out the right ratios for the right type of demographics that we have. In that area, what we were hoping for is that this project would be used by people who wanted to use transit quite a bit. And when BRT comes on, they'll have BRT and they'll have Front Runner. Really what it's kind of turned into, because it was built with low-income housing tax credits, it's low-mod housing. And it's turned into basically married housing for BYU students. Dave's daughter's getting married. and so my sister-in-law called me and said, hey, they're thinking, and they're from Orem, and they're thinking of moving in Startup Crossing, and well, they would fit the profile that they're looking for. And so the parking ratios haven't quite turned out. Again, the other thing that we haven't done, but we do need to have a conversation, and it's a difficult conversation to have, is how do we regulate our on-street parking and use that? It's in a sense, when we have a really old apartment complex with hardly any parking at all, by having parking for free on the street, without thinking about it, we've made a decision that we're subsidizing that owner by allowing their tenants not to park on off-street parking that they've provided, but we're providing it for free for them on Provo City streets, which kind of cuts against redevelopment of properties in the area that they might otherwise have. But politically, it's a hard thing to do, to talk about regulating the street. That's in the Bill of Rights, by the way, in between guns and the First Amendment. There's one about parking anytime, anywhere for free. So.
Why don't you explain what you mean it's not quite working out?
Well, they have what was the ratio, Bill? The parking ratio at startup.
1.5 for a one-bedroom unit and 2.25 for a two-bedroom unit. But in that TOD area, the developer, by right of the zone at the time, was allowed to take a 50% reduction off that required calculation. That 50% reduction, which may work very well a few years from now when Provo is more established as an urban area and has better mass transit and some of those things. Right now, we're not there yet, and so that 50% haircut turned out to be too much. Residents to the west are impacted by spillover from that complex. Businesses to the east are complaining about spillover from that complex.
So, Bill, I got a question. You mentioned earlier that the one apartment complex you're discussing has a waiting list for parking. So, obviously, they don't have enough room for all the cars that want to come in. Are other complexes doing that as well? Complexes where they're doing less parking, they're keeping the ratio higher, and then if somebody wants to park, they get on a waiting list, or they pay.
I think it's pretty uniform that the complexes have a waiting list for parking spaces.
So I know Glenwood, I believe, is like a .58, if I'm not wrong, across from Riviera. And I've had people tell me that, they get on a list there for a spot as well. It sounds like that's fairly common.
Yes.
That they don't have enough room, and if you're not on the list, you can't bring a car to that complex.
No, they still rent there and they still bring their car. They just find someplace somewhere around.
Somewhere else.
The thing about a Glenwood is if you look at where it's located in between Freedom Boulevard and University Avenue, if you don't have a parking spot, you're really not incentivized to bring a car because you're parking it and walking blocks and blocks and blocks to get there. So there's almost, because of the nature of the roads around it, a de facto on-street parking regulations that they can't do it. And so where we really have a hard problem is in Joaquin neighborhood, where streets are just free all the way around it and there's spillover, and we have all these old non-conforming complexes. We did a study once and went in and figured out how many off-street parking spots we needed. And the lion's share of the on-street parking problem came from old non-conforming structures. So to do new things, and so sometimes people say, well, have 1-for-1 ratio or even more. Even if we did that, it still wouldn't take care of some of the what people believe the problem to be on the street because of these older complexes.
And you're penalizing the new ones by making them put in more than they would otherwise need and subsidizing the others. Just the overall question is that proposed parking ratio enough? Hopefully from the discussion, you can see it's really site dependent. A lot of the problems in Joaquin, and the reason why, at least for myself, the reason why I voted to move it from the 0.7 up to the higher, is the conditions that are there now. And your conditions may be different. I also voted for that with the idea that this is kind of an interim solution. This is kind of stopping it from getting worse until we're bringing on a parking manager. And I'm hopeful that we're going to approach this very differently than we have in the past. And maybe, I believe a city parking manager, and I am hopeful that we will manage on-street parking anywhere that there's parking congestion. And I think that approach is going to change the dynamics. We talked a little bit about induced parking. If you have these complexes and they only have so many off-street parking, and now on-street parking is regulated, now that becomes less attractive to someone who has a car, but perhaps more attractive to someone who doesn't have a car. And so you start shifting a little bit, or there's now a disincentive to bring a car where there really isn't now. And so it's my hope that some of these things will change the parking demand and make quality of life better.
I find it interesting. I went to BYU, and my freshman year
and there's kind of a okay. Well, there's a line over here as well. Just the last thought is it's kind of a chicken and egg. I'm hopeful. I believe that the startup crossing parking problem is going to get much better when the BRT opens. Right now, like they've said, we've got a lot of BYU students, but there's no quick way to get from startup crossing to BYU. That changes when BRT comes in. If you build these things without the mass transit, or if you don't allow these things to be built until you have mass transit in, then there's never going to be a demand for mass transit that will bring the mass transit in. And so, you know, if that thing wasn't able to be built, if something else went in with lots and lots of parking, now mass transit isn't going to be as successful when it comes. So I think there's just growing pains, and I think we have to be aware of that and be willing to have experience some of those growing pains in order to have a much better future.
I've got the mic. He's in line. Dave Connect. So, Bill, the Dave Cabanella's Lanai project, do you remember the ratio on that one?
I think it's about 0.7.
It's over 0.7.
Yeah. I think it's at least 0.8. And it seems like there was a time when we would set the ratio for like 0.8 per unit or per bed, but then we would also add on top of that a little bit for guest parking. So, and that may vary, but if you added, 0.2, you'd end up 0.8 becomes 1, but that includes the guest parking. Now, I worked with Dave 10 years ago to get that. They were asking like 1-to-1, and we did surveys, just like Gary said, in the middle of the night, and even the projects that were built with a ratio of 1-to-1, because at one time we did require 1-to-1, and certain projects were built that way. And you can go and you would find, like you said, 15 to 20% of the parking spaces of those that had plenty of parking were still vacant because, well, they may be parking on the street or who knows what. So that kind of led to deciding or making the case for Dave Cabanella to have that ratio. And he's said at times it's been good and other times kind of tight, but that's been pretty good. But I bring up the point that you just can't say 0.8 and not also add some for the guest parking, or you really have a problem. And it's always been a lack of parking. Things have changed. We have the things built in the 40s and 50s, and there's always been a shortage, except for a few units that were required 1-to-1. But generally speaking, there's always been a shortage of parking, and it's been crowded on the streets in Joaquin for as long as I can remember. So to me, that's a disincentive. People that know anything about Provo know there's a parking problem, and so we have this built-in disincentive, and yet they still keep bringing the cars. So we have to deal with that reality. And one last thing was over on 9th East, there's a chapel up across from what used to be Deseret Towers, which is where my office is. And one day we came out and there was a car there and it had a note, handwritten note on the window, and it said, "Please don't tow my car. I pay my tithing, my parents pay their tithing, and they said I could park here, so please don't tow my car."
We've had some, Tom McDonald, we've had some success with having permit parking on streets near the university. Jamie, I don't think we've charged for that permit parking, though, have we? So has Provo used any permit parking on your streets, either for fee or just for local residents? Yes. Yes is an easy answer. Thank you.
So yes, we have permit parking programs. One area is the Seven Peaks, what used to be the Seven Peaks Golf Course area. And I lived on that street before all that area was developed out. We had built a home near Arlington, and it was the Arlington units had a couple of parking spaces in each unit, and then a few visitors, but about 6 of them were purchased, and then they put in 6 batching singles, and pretty soon those parking spaces were gone. And then the streets, as those filled in, they were not all the way built when we moved in, but as those filled in, it became a parking nightmare, and our street on both sides were just parked with cars constantly. And so we put in a parking permit program, and yes, it did clear the street and it made it safer and it made it better, but then we had to always remember to put a pass in our friends or family's car while they were visiting, and if we forgot, they'd get booted or towed. And so I think we ourselves ended up paying for a few of those just because we felt bad that our family didn't see the sign at the top of or the bottom of the street, and it was such a headache for us personally that we moved. But the neighborhood that's been established there behind it, they like the fact that it's there because it does give them the flexibility to have visitors come and see them, and that their streets aren't totally lined, day and night, and it does provide a safer, environment for them. And I think I know they appreciate it. In fact, we just had another group that was the newer homes were added onto that same development, just asked to be added to that permit parking program. So it is successful, but it's not perfect, and it does come with its own set of problems too. The mayor was instrumental in getting a predatory towing ordinance passed, so the people, the tow companies aren't sitting at the top of the street waiting to pounce, but I still think it's an issue, with trying to deal with the fact that you can only have so many visitors and only at certain times, and you really do have to go through other hoops if you're going to have a gathering at your house, which, we gather. We like to have people over at our homes, and so there are some of those things that make it not so convenient, but for quality of life and for safety and a lot of those things and being able to have your streets available, it's been beneficial.
Sam Lentz, a quick question. In Provo and Orem, do we have grocery stores that offer grocery delivery? I know there are several that do grocery pickup, but I'm just thinking back to when my wife and I lived in a city that was very transit-oriented a few years ago, and that was kind of the game changer when we discovered that we could just have the groceries delivered right to our apartment. And I'm thinking a lot of these students, when I was a student, that was one of the biggest headaches for me, was trying to lug 10 bags of groceries back if I was trying to walk or take the bus or something. So do we have grocery stores around here that offer delivery to the home?
I think so. We have boutique.
I think Walmart does in our...
I know they do pickup. I've actually done it before. It was convenient, but you still need a card to do that. So, okay. Because I'm just thinking, kind of to Dave's point, the chicken and egg, if we're trying to create this new reality where people don't really need a car as much, that would be, I think, a giant leap forward and maybe an opportunity for a grocery store around here to pick up quite a bit of business. So
I'm trying to think of the name of it. I don't want to speak out. It seemed like it was Blue Ribbon or something. Anyway, I got a little flyer in the mail that there are companies that they'll deliver you basically a week of meals, and all of the ingredients that you need to make those meals. But is it Blue Apron? That's what it is, Blue Apron. Thank you. I couldn't remember the name of it. But so I think it's more business-minded people that are trying to fill a need that we have in Provo. But I don't know how economic that is for a student. Yeah, so I didn't really look into it, but I don't know of grocery stores that do that. I know that they'll deliver to the curb, if you want to pull your car around. But I think that's maybe, I don't know. I don't think that they'll have it ready for you type of thing, but I don't think that actually deliver it to your home other than Winder Dairy that will deliver, some of those types of things to home.
You're not talking about students using their car every day for all their activities. They want to use it on the weekend or go somewhere in the Salt Lake, whatever, but much of the time they're not using their car. So
The same thing happens with people who buy a downtown or live in a downtown apartment or a T&D apartment. They need a place to warehouse the car, so it's there when they need it, but they don't drive it very often. They still have a car. It's still an easy place to park.
sounds like a need because have some 5 cars in the apartment complex to rent it out to students for dates.
Either that or a parking garage with the elevators where you can, dial your car up or down. I don't know.
One last question, because a couple of times I heard that a lot of your on-site parking was still had 15 to 20%, that, they're not full for whatever reason, but the streets are. And I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around that personally, because I think we have some of the same problems here in Orem. Again, one of our locations we found out was that they were charging extra. Have you ever asked the facilities, do you charge extra for parking? Is that why why is it not filling up? Is it not charging, or do they not feel safe? Is the lighting bad? Are the spaces too tight? Are they getting their car doors scratched? Why are they not filling up the on-site?
All of those issues, all of those issues come into play. And even, especially if you're charging off-street for parking, the street is free. And so by having the street free, you're really throwing a big word into the overall market. And one of the things that we're hoping with the parking managers help us get through and think about, in an area, do we do a parking district? Do we treat parking more like a utility? And we create a parking structure that people can use and warehouse their vehicles, and then use them on weekends or things when they need to do it. But also to help people, nobody thinks about parking separately from housing. It's just housing, and parking goes along with it. We're trying to get people to think discreetly about housing costs and effects and parking costs and effects, and help them do that. And so all of those issues that you raised, one of the biggest ones I hear too is it's just faster for me to park out front, run in, than to park underneath, wind my way up through the structure. And so everything being equal, we'll go where it's cheapest and easiest.
And if one of the problems is that they're charging extra for parking, if that's one of the problems that we can solve, is okay, you're not going to charge extra, it's going to be a part of your rent. People may have to wait if you're, less than a 1-to-1, and they may have to park on the street or whatever. But again, one of the things, because our council is going to see this, so I'm just planting this seed in your mind. The developer's going to come with his traffic consultant. You're going to see all of these parking studies that were done in Provo, a couple of in Orem, but most of them in Provo, and they're going to show you that the on-site parking is not full. There is not a problem. Therefore, pass a 0.65. And you're gonna be scratching your head and you're gonna go, well, why did Provo go from a .7 to a .8 if, anyway, I'm still having a hard time wrapping my mind around this and trying to figure out why are people not parking on site?
So Councilmember C-Strand's been waiting for about 3 months. He would like to make a comment.
I was just thinking of, with the spillover, you see an increase in crime that comes with that as well. Do you have more problems with theft, burglary, vandalism when you have more cars on the street?
Only when they leave their iPhone or their iPad in an unlocked car on top of the seat.
On a per capita basis, we haven't seen an increase in crime.
Okay, so there's another factor, and I think it's still a problem. Bill or Gary, help me out here. We've had responsible apartment owners who in the past said, oh, I don't have enough parking, and there's an empty lot across the street. I'm going to pave it, I'm going to let my people park there, and boom, it's illegal because we don't allow off-site parking. Is that still not allowed?
It is allowed.
It is allowed now. Okay, but some of these other units that have 15 or 20%, that's probably because they were required to have one-to-one, and either they're parking on the...
No, even walking villas, the one we pointed at, you guys live in Villa Nine.
Still some empty.
There's still vacant spaces. Some of it, I think, is
Charging?
it reaches a point in the night where people don't feel safe parking in there and walking up to the building, and it's safer to park on the street, which is with a more direct line into the building. So I think that's part of it, but it's also some of the other things that Paul Goodrich mentioned.
So
Even that process, we find vacant spaces in the middle of the night.
safety and convenience. What I'm getting at is some of these parking garages that are not full across the street could be a property that has virtually no parking and would love to park in those spaces, but there's no agreement and maybe not even the possibility of subleasing these empty spaces to someone else who would like to use them. Do we have that possibility?
Yeah, I don't think there's a possibility to sublease those because in most cases, those empty spaces are needed for the parking requirement for that building. When I go and talk to the manager of the complex, they tell me that every one of their on-site spaces is leased. Somebody's got their name on that, but yet we survey it and we find open spaces.
So, it's interesting. I think we're going to see this problem not go away, but actually increase. So I think it's something that both cities need to work together on and try to come up with some ideas. I'm aware of a 12-plex in Orem. They have enough parking for all the cars of that 12-plex behind the apartments. Their entire parking lot is empty, and everybody parks on the street. The apartments are up against the street. It's much more convenient, come down the street, park the car right there, run in, because the entrance to the apartments are on the front side. The parking's on the back side. So they just park there, run in, run back out. Nobody goes to the back, and the neighbors are all complaining about how this apartment complex has all of their people out on the street, and they in fact cannot park on the streets in front of their own house. So it is a real problem.
One more brief comment.
One more brief comment, we probably should move on.
The lower the parking ratio, the bigger the problem, and it's just a fact. All the exceptions aside, when you have a lower parking ratio, you have a bigger parking problem. I mean, that's just history.
Okay, thank you for that. Wisdom, George, appreciate that. We'll go ahead and move on to our last item, and that is CDBG funding. As many of you know, right now, funds, when you consider what these funds support, I'd just like to read a few things and then turn the time over to you. But they do support the Friends of the Food and Care Coalition. They support the homeless housing for women in crisis. They do literacy. They do Habitat for Humanity, which is huge, building homes. They do things like heat administration, helping to provide money for heat for the needy during the winter. Code enforcement, Children's Justice Center, which is huge. There's a lot of things that possibly the Trump administration or Mr. Trump himself, President Trump, may not have even been around or involved with that are really huge for those on the lower end of our society economically.
Well, it's been a number of funding cycles now, predating the Obama administration, where CDBG funds have been proposed to be cut or eliminated. And so far, that's not happened. It's a program that I think is tremendously popular in Congress because I think congressmen of both political stripes see the kind of good that it does in the hands of local governments and the flexibility that it provides to local governments to use these funds is a popular notion. And I think most people think it's going to be, my boss included, think it's going to be fully funded this year.
Congress is in recess, recess, and they're supposed to vote on this, I believe, April 28th.
That's the target date. There are critics of CDBG funding. Some people think it's, in many instances, that it's kind of escaped the boundaries for which it was initially intended, which is primarily the kinds of things that you just cited, Mayor. And so I think the more information that communities can provide to the congressional delegation, I'm only speaking for Senator Hatch, but I think the entire delegation is probably in the same boat. The more information that you can provide and as to how CDBG monies bless the more poverty-stricken elements of your community, the better sell the full funding package becomes, I think. So,
Encourage us to send some information back to them.
Absolutely. I can give you the email address of the person in Senator Hatch's office that you should direct that to. Her name's Diane Browning. And her email address is DIANNE_BROWNING@hatch.senate.gov.
Great. Anybody choose to make any comments or thoughts on this?
Is there any benefit to doing like a joint resolution with councils? Is that carrying more weight than just giving them information?
I'm sorry,
A joint resolution with the two councils?
that wouldn't harm it at all. That would be helpful, and I think more particularly the anecdotal and data-based information that you have as to how it's being used and how it's benefiting your community, especially in the areas of poverty or urban blight, if you will, becomes things that are more closely aligned with what many people in Congress think the original intent of CDBG funds were to be used for. And so
Can you repeat what those things were?
mostly dealing with poverty and urban blight. So housing is a big one. This is a program that's administered under the Housing and Urban Development, and so they kind of have a keen eye toward low-income housing and other, the mayor alluded to shelters, food banks, those kind of things that bless the lives of more people that are in poverty. So.
All right, maybe we can get together on that. Yes.
What I would add to that, if there is interest in doing that joint resolution, add also the Home Investment Partnerships Program with CDBG, because it's also slated to, that's in 2018 budget, to have single fund, and that provides the anecdotal information to both cities on that respect.
Okay, maybe we can get together on that, yes.
I'd just say one more thing I've noticed on at least the participation we've had with the CDBG funding is the CDBG funding gives some pretty good credibility to these organizations, which also can leverage that and get additional private contributions to their cause on top of it. So the nervous part for me is when you pull some of the funding, it takes away a little bit of that aspect that doesn't make it as easy for a private entity to contribute.
And sometimes the leveraging aspect of that can be a two-edged sword. Some people will look at that and say, see, the private sector monies we can substitute those rather than a match or a leverage of some kind. It becomes, in the eyes of some, opportunity to substitute those private monies for the public monies.
All right.
What's the urgency on this, and how soon? We meet on Tuesdays, so I don't know if we can make this as early as Tuesday or not, Mr. Chair, but.
Well, they are set to vote on it 2 weeks from tomorrow.
So,
We have one more meeting before then, next Tuesday. Do you have a meeting before then?
So maybe we could do a joint resolution between us and Steve. Can you pass on some of that information then to Ron? I'm sorry, to Diane? Yeah. Okay. Any further comment?
Well, I guess we better get a draft worked up.
Yes. Yes.
I was just going to say from staff, we'll
Okay. Steve Downs is the one that heads up on our CDBG activity. Yeah, that'd be great.
May I make one comment?
Yes.
If we're going to really be transparent about CDBG funding, only 15% goes to social services. So you better add in that resolution economic development, because more goes to economic development than social services. I can't vote for something that says it's only used for poverty, to alleviate poverty, because that's just not the case.
But those things do go to poverty-laden areas. They have to qualify for that.
I understand, but just look at where the money goes.
Also don't know that you can necessarily quantify it by percentage to where it's going, because, for example, on the economic poverty areas, the areas of need, there are many institutions that receive them. And so, I think you have to quantify it on people affected as well.
If you can draw the nexus between economic development and alleviation of poverty, if that's possible, in any case that you can, that would be helpful too.
So just to follow up on what George was saying, just a couple of years ago, we had reduced the amount down to, as little as 10% that we were doing the social services. And then it was argued maybe 12%, and finally we got back to the 15 where it used to be. But that's the cap. We can't give these groups that are applying more than 15% of the money. Now, the other money has to be used still to help low and moderate income people, but it can be job creation, it can be all sorts of things, programs for owner occupancy. We've used it in various ways. Sometimes it seems like it's all going to economic development. I mean, we've used it to put in the infrastructure for East Bay and for Ironton to, again, create jobs. But that is kind of a trickle down versus some of the others where we would buy and rehab homes and sell them to an owner occupant. And we used to have restrictions on the owner occupancy, which are now not as favorable with the banks, but we were trying to provide low-income people with a opportunity to get into a home and provide some stability for them and the neighborhood. A lot of our neighborhoods only have maybe 20% owner occupancy in the center part of town, so it's not very stable.